harsh scrape of chair legs cuts through the morning calm as a burly security guard looms over Marcus Hill and his son Noah at the entrance of a Park Avenue cafe. The guard's eyes narrow beneath his cap. "This is private property," he growls, gesturing to the no loitering sign. Marcus raises his palms, voice strained. "We just want coffee." A rib tension coils in the air. Patrons avert their eyes. The espresso machine hisses more insistently. Noah tugs at his father's sleeve, confusion and fear flickering in his gaze. The guard shoves Marcus back and cups clatter to the floor. It's the kind of moment where the world seems to tilt, reminding you that prejudice can erupt from the ordinary. Then through the hush, a small voice rings out, clear and unwavering. "Ma'am, could you be my mommy just for one day? If this moment moved you, share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next chapters in Noah and Evelyn's journey." Evelyn Hart sat alone at a corner table in the cafe, eyes glued to her phone as she scrolled through the day's market updates. Her sleek designer suit and perfectly coiffed hair cut a stark silhouette against the scratched wood and mismatched chairs. She was the kind of CEO who never arrived late and never let emotion seep into her decisions. Anywhere else, her presence would have sparked whispers of admiration. Here, it only invited curiosity. Across the room, the tension between Marcus Hill and the security guard simmered to a boil. Evelyn glanced up, eyebrow arched, as the guard's glare settled on the father and son pair. Marcus' hoodie drenched from last night's rain and shoes worn thin held Noah's small hand protectively. The guard pushed Marcus another step back, oblivious to the boy who watched in wide-eyed disbelief. Evelyn's manager would have called it a PR nightmare. To Evelyn, it was just another spectacle until Noah's voice cut through. The boy stepped forward, shoulders squared despite the guard's looming bulk. He looked up at Evelyn, her silhouette gleaming behind the steam of a freshly steamed cappuccino. "Ma'am," he said, voice unwavering, "could you be my mommy just for one day?" Time fractured. The cafe's hum softened to a distant drone. Evelyn's heart, long sealed behind boardroom walls, fluttered against her ribs. The guard blinked, his posture stiffening. Marcus' cheeks flushed, lunged forward. "So sorry," he stammered, trying to usher Noah back. "He runs off sometimes." "No, let him speak," Evelyn said, her voice slicing through the tension like a scalpel. Even she was surprised by the firmness of her tone. She set her phone down, the screen's glow paling in comparison to the light in Noah's eyes. The boy's coat was 2 sizes too big sleeves, the warmth of charity, and his face bore a weariness that no 6-year-old should know. "Why do you want me to be your mom?" Evelyn asked, lowering herself onto a chair so she was eye level with Noah. Noah's lip quivered. "Tomorrow's parent day at school," he said. "Everyone else has someone. I don't." Around them, a hush fell. The barista froze mid-pour. A couple paused their conversation. Even the guard's clenched fists seemed to relax. Marcus swallowed guilt, softening the rough edge of his exhaustion. "He doesn't have a mom," Marcus whispered, voice raw. "I lost my wallet." Then a delivery got canceled. The minute I turned my back, Evelyn cut him off. "What school?" she asked Noah, though she already knew she'd be there. "Noah Hill Eastwood, Elementary Room 1A. Parent day starts at 10. She nodded once decisively. "All right, just for one day." Marcus's jaw dropped. "Wait, really?" "You don't have to." But Evelyn was already rising, heels clicking against the tile as she strode toward the counter. The guard, momentarily disarmed, watched her go. Whispers trailed in her wake. "Isn't that Evelyn Hart?" What just happened? Did she really say yes? Evelyn didn't stop. She paid collected her to-go cup and walked out into the drizzle without a backward glance. Her assistant's text buzzed on her phone, board meeting at 11. "Need you." She ignored it. All that mattered were Noah's bright, hopeful eyes, an invitation she couldn't quite refuse. The ride uptown gave her time to think. She traced the outline of Eastwood Elementary in her mind. Red brick walls, chain-link fence, that cracked playground where she'd never dreamed of stepping. Would she know what to do with glitter glue, finger paint, or sing-alongs? Her world revolved around spreadsheets and leverage ratios, not glue sticks and juice boxes. Still, she arrived on time. A sleek navy coat hid her designer labels. A small bouquet of daisies in one hand, a single cupcake in a box in the other. She spotted Noah immediately standing by the gate, scanning each car. When he saw her, his face lit up in a grin so pure it chased away her lingering doubts. "You came!" he exclaimed, launching toward her. Evelyn knelt, offering the cupcake. "I never break a promise," she said softly. He threw his arms around her in a hug that warmed her more than any boardroom victory. Parents and teachers looked on, some shaking their heads, others smiling. "This is my mommy Noah," announced to a cluster of classmates just for today. Evelyn straightened, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Her pulse thudded in her throat. She could feel the prickle of cameras, some phones already raised, ready to capture the viral moment. But for now, she wasn't a CEO. She was simply someone who'd shown up. As she followed Noah through the gates, she realized that this day wasn't just about pretending. It was about rediscovering the parts of herself she'd long since buried: kindness, vulnerability, the messy beauty of connection. And though she thought she was here for a single hour, something told her that her life had just begun to change. At that moment, the cafe doors flew open with a gust of cold air and dripping umbrellas. Marcus Hill stumbled inside rainwater dripping from the brim of his cap onto the tile floor. He looked as if he'd just run a marathon uphill, his hoodie plastered to his back pant legs, damp around the ankles, and an overstuffed Instacart bag swinging wildly from one shoulder. His heart hammered in his chest as he caught sight of his son standing with Evelyn Hart, the city's most unapproachable CEO, who had somehow agreed to be mommy for a day. Marcus's first instinct was to grab Noah and run to slip out the back and duck into the drizzle, hoping against hope that no one important had noticed. But he couldn't sanction that. Not now. Not after his little boy mustered the courage to ask a stranger, "No." A stranger as rare as a Northern Lights display to fill the empty space at the other end of his family table. So Marcus halted a few feet away, desperate to catch his breath without drawing too much attention, yet painfully aware of the stares from every other customer. Evelyn looked up, her expression unreadable, but there was no mistaking the sharp focus in her eyes. "Marcus," she said, voice calm but firm. She held Noah's small hand with reassurance, as if pledging her resolve to protect him for the next 8 hours. Marcus winced. "Is it possible to blush when you're soaked through?" and approached with hands raised in an apology. "I'm so sorry," he said, voice ragged. He tried to scoop Noah into his arms, but paused, letting the boy stay where he was. He runs off sometimes, and I just lost my wallet out there. Then the delivery got canceled, and I turned around for a second." His voice wavered. Suddenly, he was the raw nerve of a father who had been balancing too many things for too long. Evelyn's gaze softened just enough that Marcus realized she wasn't scolding him. She simply met his eyes, holding that brief connection steady before she returned her attention to Noah. They were tethered now not by blood or by contract, but by mutual need and an unspoken promise. Noah shifted his weight, thumbs hooked into Evelyn's sleeve. "My school needs a parent at 9:30, not just today, but every day." He whispered more to himself than to the grown-ups. He looked up at Marcus, then back at Evelyn. "I thought, maybe you'd help." Marcus swallowed hard. He felt the weight of every second he'd missed of Noah's life, late pickups, broken toy box promises, nights spent staring at a tear-stained photograph of Noah's mother. When she passed, the world had shifted beneath him. Every hiccup in life, every obstacle had become an avalanche. But seeing Noah stand here brave as any hero from his bedtime stories, Marcus felt an unfamiliar stir-hope. He cleared his throat. "Noah, He glanced at Evelyn, whose poised presence made him feel both unworthy and oddly grateful. "Thank you," he managed, his voice cracking. "Thank you for this." Evelyn nodded once, a small decisive gesture that made Marcus want to kneel and kiss her hand like some knight of old. Instead, he reached out and ruffled Noah's hair, leaving the boy to beam with relief. The barista, who had frozen mid-foam, cleared his throat. "Would you like anything else?" he asked, eyes darting between the soggy man and the meticulously dressed woman. Evelyn shook her head. "No, thank you. We'll take it from here." She turned to Marcus. "You go home dry off. I'll bring Noah back by 3 sharp. Marcus hesitated, part relief, part dread twisting in his gut. His mind raced through deadlines, upcoming gigs, rent due next week, and the ever-growing mountain of bills. The thought of leaving Noah with a stranger, however extraordinary, felt like both a gift and a gamble. But when Noah slipped his hand into Marcus's and gave a little nod, Marcus exhaled. "Okay," he said, voice steadying. "Be careful." He gave Evelyn one more grateful look, then scooped up the Instacart bag and guided Noah toward the door. Outside, the drizzle had lightened to a mist. Marcus tucked the bag under his arm and slipped his cap back on. He lingered at the threshold, peering back through the glass pane at Evelyn and Noah sharing a laugh. The sight brought a lump to his throat, something shy and unfamiliar that felt dangerously close to relief. As they walked back to the brownstone, Noah chattered about crayons and glue sticks, already juggling the optimism of childhood with the unshakable confidence of someone who'd found an ally in a boardroom titan. Marcus listened, battered but buoyed. He realized that in asking for help, they'd done more than just salvage one chaos-ridden morning. They'd opened a door to something neither of them knew they needed. At the foot of the stoop, Noah turned. "Thanks, Dad. I knew you'd figure it out." Marcus felt tears sting the corners of his eyes. He nodded, swallowing against a lump of love and guilt and something else, pride. "Always, kiddo. Always." Then as they climbed the steps, Marcus glanced at his phone and caught sight of 3 missed calls and a string of urgent texts. Each ping felt like a ticking clock reminding him that the world he ran from outside this brownstone was still waiting, but he pocketed the phone without answering. For once, the beeping could wait. Right now, walking his son to school with the promise of a safe return was triumph enough. Inside the apartment, a radiator rattled in the hall, the hum of old life echoing around them. Shoes were kicked off, backpacks dropped, and Marcus ruffled Noah's hair before sending him off to wash up. He leaned against the hallway wall, taking a moment to let the gravity of that morning settle in. He thought about the cafe, about Evelyn Hart's unexpected kindness, and about how a single question from a 6-year-old had upended both of their lives. That question danced in his mind. Could you be my mommy just for one day? And he realized the answer had already shaped their futures. Marcus closed his eyes and breathed in the musty apartment air filling his lungs. He felt sudden clarity today. He hadn't just fought for coffee or mopped up tears. He'd reclaimed a fragment of his own humanity by allowing grace to step in. The world outside would still judge him by his shoes, his hoodie, and his debt. But Noah saw something deeper. And so did Evelyn Hart. When the front door clicked shut behind him, Marcus didn't rush back into the drizzle. He paused on the landing, listening to the distant chatter of children in the street and the soft hum of the city waking up. He let himself smile a shaky curve of hope. Then he whispered to himself, "Thank you." And as he headed back out into the mist, Marcus Hill carried more than groceries. And an apology he carried, the belief that sometimes the smallest voices can pull us out of our darkest storms. Evelyn Hart sat back down, her posture rigid, as the latte shop's hum crept back into focus. She turned her gaze on Noah, who stayed rooted to the spot, clutching the hem of her tailored coat. The noise of steaming milk and slippery spoons faded into the background. "Why do you need me to be your mom?" she asked gently, though the question felt strange on her lips. Around them, cups rattled, a sugar packet crinkled, and somewhere a phone camera lit up. She watched Noah's chest rise in a small, determined breath. Marcus hovered behind him, dripping rainwater onto the floor and shifting from foot to foot, but Evelyn held the moment she would hear the answer first. Noah looked up, brow furrowed with earnest concentration. "Tomorrow's Parent Day," he said softly, voice trembling just enough to reveal how much he hated speaking in front of crowds. "And I don't have one." His words landed like stones in a still pond. The barista paused, mid-wipe latte art undone. A couple by the window lowered their mugs, eyes wide. Evelyn felt the weight of dozens of gazes settling on her, as though they were all waiting for her reaction. Marcus's throat bobbed as he opened his mouth to interject, but he swallowed the apology that never formed. She let Noah's answer hang in the air, tasting its bittersweet truth. A little boy, faces scrubbed clean of tears, standing in a cafe full of strangers, asking for something that felt impossibly large, yet achingly simple. For a moment, Evelyn imagined herself across the table, a child with no one to hold her hand. She thought of her sister Elise, gone too soon, of the lullabies never sung. The bedtime kisses never placed. That memory coiled in her chest, and her boardroom certainties slipped just enough for impulse to take hold. She looked down at Noah's hopeful eyes and said softly, "Just for a day, kid." The words felt foreign as they passed her lips, yet they carried a gravity she couldn't deny. Marcus blinked, jaw slack. "Wait," he stammered, "you don't." But Evelyn had already risen. The hem of her crisp blazer brushed the back of her chair. She managed a small smile at Noah. "I'll be there," she promised, voice steady. Then she strode toward the counter to pay each step in her black pump sounding impossibly loud against the tile. As she crossed to the register, the cafe seemed to hold its breath. Conversation slowed to murmurs. A barista froze mid-squirt of foam. Two customers exchanged astonished looks. Someone whispered, "Did she just agree to be that kid's mom?" A glint of a phone camera winked from a corner table. Evelyn felt a flush creep up her neck but kept her head high. She tapped her card, collected her latte, and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear as she turned toward the door. Outside, the drizzle had lightened to a soft mist. Evelyn paused under the cafe's awning, the wail of the city's traffic echoing off the pavement. She inhaled the cool, damp air, her reflection shimmering in the glass doors behind her, a woman in a power suit who had just pledged to step into a world governed by crayons and finger paint. She tilted her chin up, letting the droplets bead on her lashes. The hum of the street felt distant now. She was suspended between two worlds, the sleek corridors of Hart Capital and the brightly colored chaos of a first-grade classroom. She took her first deliberate step forward, letting the cafe doors swing closed behind her. Her heels clicked a metronome beat as she walked down Park Avenue, neon signs blurring into streaks in the damp evening. People with umbrellas parted around her hurrying home, or to dinner reservations, unaware that their city had just been reshaped by an unexpected promise. Evelyn's mind raced ahead to tomorrow. What time did school start? What do moms do first thing in a classroom? She'd spent her life calculating risks and rewards, but standing here she realized some decisions couldn't be measured on a spreadsheet. The measured rhythm of her stride slowed as she reached her car. Her driver, accustomed to her usual dietary requests and schedule changes, peered up through the tinted windows. Evelyn lifted a hand in greeting, the latte cup held steady in her other hand. "Take me home," she said. Voice calm, but inside, the gears of her mind were clicking, storybooks, snack schedules, what it meant to hold a 6-year-old's hand all morning. She wondered if she could really do it, if she had the patience, the grace, the openness to step into someone else's family for just one day. As the car pulled away, the cafe's neon sign receded in the rearview mirror. Evelyn pressed her palms to the cool leather seat, leaning back as the city lights streamed past. She closed her eyes briefly, remembering Noah's brave little face and the tremor in his voice. Tomorrow at 10, she would walk through those school doors carrying daisies and a single cupcake, and for a moment she would trade her boardroom for a classroom. The weight of that promise settled in her chest, heavier than any quarterly forecast she'd ever managed. For the first time in years, Evelyn Hart felt something she hadn't anticipated, anticipation itself. It wasn't driven by market trends or fiscal goals. It came from the quiet hope in a child's request and the uncharted territory of belonging. She didn't know if she'd be good at glue sticks or story time, but she had said yes. And now, as the city pulsed around her, she held on to that promise, already counting the hours until tomorrow's dawn. Evelyn Hart crossed the threshold of her penthouse, shrugging out of her tailored coat and kicking off her stiletto heels onto the marble floor. The city stretched beneath her like a sea of fireflies, honking taxis, yellow streetlights. The faint glow of Times Square billboards blurred into constellations. She sank onto the edge of her velvet sofa and reached for the glass of red wine she had abandoned hours ago, its surface still unbroken, still waiting. She swept her satin-clad leg across the coffee table, snatched up the wine, and stared into its depths as if it might offer the answers she couldn't articulate. Her phone buzzed, cutting through the silence. "Evelyn." "You there?" It was Maya, her assistant voice crisp even through the speaker. Evelyn lifted one perfectly arched brow, remembering that she was expected at a board review tomorrow morning. "Yes," she said, tone neutral. "I'm here." Maya hesitated, as if parsing the weight behind Evelyn's one-word reply. "Just checking in. You've got the investors' call at 8 and the board meeting at 11. Are you thinking about the kid?" The question hovered in the air, unexpected. Evelyn didn't respond right away. Instead, she raised the glass to her lips, let the tannins coat her throat. She wondered if Maya could hear the catch in her breath, the way Noah's earnest gaze had lodged itself in her mind. "Kid what?" "Kid," she finally said, voice smooth, practiced. But even as she spoke, she felt the truth slip through her control. Maya didn't press further. She simply sighed. "All right. Remember, you promised to be at the school at 10 sharp. Car's booked for 8:30. I'll send over your schedule in 5. Click. The call ended, leaving Evelyn alone with the echo of that question and an untouched glass of wine. She set the glass on the low table and rose, pacing the length of the living room. Her heels, now bare soles, clicked on the hardwood. She crossed to the floor-to-ceiling windows and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. The rain-kissed streets shimmered below, and somewhere sirens wailed. The world felt both impossibly vast and suffocatingly small as she thought of tomorrow's Parent Day ceremony, an entire classroom waiting to welcome a stranger into its midst, a child trusting her with something far bigger than a cupcake or a parent's badge. The memory surfaced unbidden, her sister Elise's laughter spilling through a sunlit kitchen newborn, tucked in her arms, her face radiant with a joy Evelyn had envied. Then the change, the way Elise's smile dimmed when the baby cried at night, how she shut the door on her own sorrow. How Evelyn, buried in negotiations and conference calls, didn't hear the sobs muffled behind the bedroom wall until it was too late. She remembered the smell of antiseptic the day she found Elise in the hospital corridor, eyes glassy, clutching nothing but emptiness. The doctor's words echoed in her mind, postpartum depression. Very severe. And the funeral that followed, silent like a snowfall, leaving holes in everyone's life. Evelyn pressed her palm against the glass, as if she could slide through it and rewrite the past. She had built her empire on discipline and distance, on mastering every landscape except her own heart. She had buried Elise's memories behind deal documents and investment portfolios, convinced that emotional vulnerability was a liability. But now a 6-year-old boy's plea had cracked that armor, revealing the raw place where regret and longing still thrummed. She turned away from the window and strode to the bar cart, pouring herself a second glass. The red wine caught the lamplight as she raised it to her lips. She inhaled its oak and berry notes, letting the warmth spread through her chest, softening the edges she'd sharpened for so long. She thought of Noah's trembling voice and Marcus's weary apology. They had offered her a doorway into a world she'd left behind, and she'd opened it without a second thought. Evelyn sank to the floor, leaning back against the sofa. She picked up her phone and scrolled through the evening's messages, until she found a photo she'd snapped earlier of Noah's hopeful face. She hadn't meant to save it. It lingered in her camera roll like a secret. Now she pressed her thumb against the screen, watching his bright eyes flicker in the glow. She typed a message to Maya, "I need glitter glue. Also remind me what time the pickup is tomorrow." Then she deleted it, realizing it sounded ridiculous. Instead, she typed, "All set for tomorrow at 10. I'll be there." Sent. Her phone buzzed again, a confirmation from a florist about daisies for the office. Evelyn sighed, recalling the small bouquet she'd scouted before leaving the cafe, a handful of white daisies with cheerful green stems. She shook her head. Even that action felt like a departure from her usual meticulous planning. Daisies. What kind of mother for a day carried daisies into a first-grade classroom? A sudden wave of fatigue swept over her. She stood, walked to the bedroom, and shed the last of her formality. The silk blouse, the jeweled earrings, leaving only the dress she'd chosen for tomorrow, hanging neatly in her wardrobe. She slipped out of her skirt and blouse, folding them with reverence she couldn't quite explain. Then, barefoot on the plush carpet, she curled up on the bed, pulling a cashmere throw around her legs. The room was quiet, save for the distant hum of highway traffic and the occasional drip from the bathroom faucet. Evelyn closed her eyes, willing herself to rest, but sleep felt elusive. Her mind circled back to Elise's hospital room, to the hush of the funeral chapel, to the brittle ache that had never entirely healed. She realized that her life had been a perpetual balancing act, corporate conquests on one hand, personal devastation on the other, and she'd always known which side to conceal. But tomorrow she would cross that boundary. She would sit on a tiny blue rug with a room full of giggling children accept cupcakes smeared with frosting, and read a picture book in a voice that was anything but polished. She would stick her fingers into glitter glue, listen to finger puppets squeak, and be someone's mommy without guarantee of a paycheck or a contract. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She brushed it away, impatient with her own vulnerability. Evelyn Hart, iron-willed CEO of Hart Capital, didn't cry in penthouses. She made decisions signed off on millions and commanded respect. Yet here she was, undone by a 6-year-old's yearning and a ghost she'd never truly laid to rest. Her phone lit up once more, a reminder of her 8:30 car. Evelyn sighed and pushed herself into a seated position, placing both feet on the floor. She reached beneath her pillow and pulled out a small silver locket. Inside was a faded photograph of her sister and her niece smiling on a summer afternoon. She traced the glass with her fingertip and whispered, "I'll make it right, tomorrow." Then she closed the locket and slipped it into her evening clutch. Standing in the dim glow of her bedside lamp, Evelyn smoothed her nightgown and walked back to the living room. She collected the half-drunk glass of wine and set it on the coffee table before the locket, an unspoken offering of reconciliation between past and future. She rotated the locket in her palm, feeling its chill, then tucked it into her clutch beside her phone. The penthouse fell silent once more. Evelyn pulled the throw tighter, took a steadying breath, and closed her eyes. In the hush, she heard the echo of Noah's voice, just for a day, and she understood that promises could reshape a life, that stepping through a classroom door might crack open the parts of her she thought were long gone. She let the dark cloak her fears and drifted towards sleep, the city lights dimming behind her closed eyelids. For the first time in years, Evelyn Hart felt something unknown, something uncalculable and unguarded. And as she finally surrendered to the night, she held fast to the hope that tomorrow, her cracked armor might just become a bridge. Evelyn eased out of the Range Rover under the low canopy of Eastwood Elementary bouquet of daisies cradled in one arm, cupcake box balanced in the other. The driver's door closed with a soft click, and she took a steadying breath before stepping onto the cracked concrete. The morning sun glinted off her polished pumps as she tucked stray hairs behind her ear, smoothing the lapel of her navy blazer. Around her, parents and children hustled through the metal gates, backpacks, coffee cups, strollers, and sneakers, all mingling in a kaleidoscope of everyday life. Evelyn felt the world shift beneath her high heels. No boardroom, no glass towers, just a red brick schoolhouse and 6-year-old Noah Hill waiting inside. She carried her daisies and cupcake up the short flight of steps, the petals bright against her tailored sleeve. A pair of teachers in casual cardigans greeted her with warm smiles. Miss Lopez, whose laminated badge read 1A, and Ms. Patel, who was arranging fruit skewers on a folding table. "Good morning, Ms. Hart," Miss Lopez said, guiding Evelyn through the doorway into a world of linoleum floors and colorful bulletin boards. The air smelled of crayons and chalk dust, of warmed-up glue and powdered donuts, and for the first time in years, Evelyn inhaled without calculation. Inside room 1A, 40 pairs of curious eyes lifted toward her, and a hush rippled through the small desks arranged in a semicircle. Tiny coats hung on hooks by the door water bottles lined a windowsill, and a hand-drawn banner above the whiteboard proclaimed, "Welcome Parents," in splotchy letters. Evelyn's pulse ticked up as she realized she was the parent. She placed her daisies on a side table next to the snack trays and set the cupcake carefully beside them. Then she crouched to Noah's level, her designer suit awkward against the child-sized chairs, and whispered, "Are you ready?" He nodded, eyebrows dancing with excitement, and she let him lead her to a spot on the rainbow-hued rug. The morning began with glue sticks and glitter. Each child had a paper heart to decorate for Parent Day, and Evelyn's heart stuttered as she peeled the protective cap from a tube of glue. She squeezed too hard. A ribbon of glue arced across her fingers, sticky and gleaming. A boy beside her giggled and offered to help, his freckled hand patting the glue gently. She managed a small smile, flattening her heart onto the construction paper and shaking iridescent glitter over it until it sparkled like confetti. Her knees complained at the cramped angle, but she ignored the ache watching Noah's face light up as she draped his heart with glitter too. He leaned in close, brushing his nose against hers in gratitude, and all the boardroom power plays felt as distant as echoes. Next came the sing-along, The Wheels on the Bus, echoed through the classroom in unsteady rounds. Children rose to their feet, dancing in place, clapping hands and swaying. Evelyn hesitated. She had no rhythm, no sense for childhood melodies, but when Noah's small hand slipped into hers, she let herself sway. Her voice was tentative at first, too refined, but as she joined the chorus, it softened into something warm and unguarded. She noticed a child venturing mommy into the chorus, another mimicking the hand motions. Laughter bubbled up in her chest. For a moment, she closed her eyes and surrendered to the simple joy of it. After singing, the teacher invited everyone to share a snack. Evelyn watched Noah's classmates beam as they bit into mini muffins and fruit cups. When it was her turn, she set the cupcake on Noah's desk and whispered, "Here." He erupted into a grin and offered half to her. She hesitated, no nutrition label to inspect, but accepted a bite, letting the sweetness linger. The other kids leaned in, curious about her elegant appearance, the faint scent of vanilla, and something richer that trailed behind her. One shy girl asked, "Do you like cupcakes?" "Mommy?" Evelyn laughed genuinely and nodded. "I do." The girl's smile split her face in a way that made Evelyn's chest tighten with unexpected warmth. At story time, the class gathered around Miss Lopez, but she waved Evelyn forward. A hush fell as Evelyn opened the picture book Super Dads and Magical Moms. Her voice trembled on the first sentences, too formal, too well practiced. But as the story unfolded of heroic parents and clever children, her tone grew playful, punctuated by giggles and gasps from the little audience. Noah settled beside her, his head against her arm. She glanced down to see the pure contentment on his face and felt a tug in her heart she hadn't known was missing. When she finished the last page, the children begged for more. Evelyn raised her eyebrows in mock dismay, then relented with a grin, flipping back to a funny scene that sent the room into fits of laughter. By mid-morning, the classroom transformed into a carnival of finger puppets and paper airplanes. Evelyn found herself crouched under a small table, holding a puppet octopus, with yarn tentacles coaxing giggles from her young spectators. She was covered in flecks of paint and glue, her hands streaked with neon blue and pink, but she hardly noticed. Each time Noah ran to show her a new creation, calling, "Look, Mommy!" Her spirit soared. She'd never been a mother, not in the biological sense, but today she was someone's whole world. As the clock neared 10:45, the energy began to shift toward quiet reflection. Miss Lopez ushered everyone back to their seats for a final group photo, parents and children huddled in front of the colorful bulletin board. Evelyn felt a flutter as they posed her in a sea of turtlenecks and jeans, her heels peeking out beneath her skirt, a single daisy tucked behind her ear. Noah squeezed her hand and she leaned in, pressing her cheek to his. The camera's flash seemed to capture more than an image. It froze the moment that had rewritten her day and perhaps her life. When the bell rang, the parents gathered by the door, exchanging polite nods and congratulations. Someone patted Evelyn's back. "You're a natural," a mother said, eyes bright. Evelyn laughed, tucking a stray petal behind her ear. She realized she didn't want to leave. She gathered her things, empty glue sticks, a smudged paper heart, and knelt once more by Noah. "I had a wonderful time," she said, voice soft. His grin lit the hallway brighter than any boardroom victory ever had. As they walked back toward the Range Rover hand in hand, the school's chatter faded behind them. Evelyn felt the gravel under her pumps, the city air bracing and real. She looked down at Noah. His face flushed with excitement, and in that instant she knew that something fundamental had shifted. She had come for just one day to pretend to fill a role and left with something far more solid. The weight of meeting minutes and quarterly forecasts pressed lightly in her bag, overshadowed by the fluttering truth in her chest. She belonged here in this imperfect, glitter-streaked world, and for the first time she felt truly grounded. After the glitter glue settled and half the class had devoured their cupcakes, Miss Lopez swept her gaze across the room and smiled at Evelyn. "Would you like to read to us?" she asked, holding up a brightly colored storybook. Super Dads and Magical Moms. Evelyn's breath hitched. She had never been called on outside of a boardroom. Standing, she smoothed the front of her skirt, aware of every eye on her, every small pair of feet kicking excited anticipation into the carpet. She perched on the edge of the circle rug, legs folded awkwardly beneath her. The book felt foreign in her hands, its cover glossy and cheerful, a cartoon father in a cape, a mother waving a magic wand over giggling children. Evelyn cleared her throat, her tone clicking into place like a polished keynote, precise, controlled, unflinching. Today's story, she began, voice crisp, is about parents who do extraordinary things for their kids. She turned the first page and the class leaned in so far their noses nearly touched the illustrations. As she read her words, rode high on careful enunciation. Once upon a time, there was a dad who built a rocket ship in his garage so his daughter could touch the stars. The children giggled at her formal phrasing, their heads cocked like curious songbirds. Evelyn glanced down at Noah, perched beside her on a tiny chair, legs swinging. He was watching her intently, chin propped on one fist, his bright eyes reflecting the cartoon sprites dancing across the page. She moved through the story, page by page, her cadence measured. When Supermom sprinkled stardust on her children, Evelyn's voice remained businesslike until she noticed a small boy tugging at her sleeve wide-eyed in wonder. She cleared her throat, rectified her posture, and pressed on. Somewhere in the middle, she fumbled a line her voice caught on an unfamiliar word, and her cheeks warmed. A ripple of sympathy laughter rose among the children, not unkindly, just surprised to see their guest stumble. And then she felt it, a soft weight nestling against her side. Noah had shifted, curling his legs beneath him and letting his head rest on her shoulder. She hesitated, paused mid-sentence. The storybook lay open in her lap, words frozen like a paused presentation. Noah's breath was steady, even. His lashes fluttered, and his voice barely louder than a breath murmured, "You smell like cookies." The classroom stilled. Crayons rolled to a stop. Two girls froze over their coloring pages. Miss Lopez leaned forward, hands folded, watching Evelyn's reaction. For a moment, Evelyn's world shrank to the warmth of a small boy's head against her arm, the faint sweetness of his hair pressed close to her. The boardroom ceased to exist. Her carefully rehearsed narrative dissolved, replaced by something deeper and richer, the simple truth of a child's trust. The next words tumbled from her lips without thought. Soft, genuine, real. "That's because I baked some last night," she said, her voice catching. She lifted her hand to brush a stray curl from Noah's forehead, then cleared her throat and found the page she'd left off. But the story about rocket ships and magical spells no longer mattered as it had before. What mattered was this moment of shared warmth, this improbable closeness between a CEO who'd commanded boardrooms and a 6-year-old boy in need of a mother's comfort. She resumed reading, but her cadence shifted, the edges smoothing into gentle curves. And so Superdad and Magical Mom took their children on grand adventures, laughing under moonlit skies. She paused at the word laughing, smiled down at Noah's half-dreaming face, and let her lips curve into a true grin. The illustrations seemed brighter now, the colors richer. As the story unfolded, the other children relaxed. They leaned into her words, eyes shining. When she described the parents building sandcastles on the beach and sharing cozy bedtime stories. She paused again, meeting her small audience's gaze. Evelyn noticed how they mirrored her expressions, wide-eyed at the thrill of adventure, quiet at the hushed moments of love. She felt herself swept along by their engagement, her heart quickening with an unfamiliar flutter of belonging. Noah shifted, rubbing his cheek against her arm. His breathing deepened into the slow rhythm of sleep. Evelyn closed the book softly, finger tracing the edge of the final page. The room was hushed, each child perched at the edge of imagination. She raised her eyes and found Marcus standing quietly at the door, watching. His face was lined with relief and something like awe. She gave a small nod, a silent promise not to break this moment. Miss Lopez helped collect the storybook, and as she passed behind Evelyn, she whispered, "Thank you. That was beautiful." Evelyn's cheeks warmed again, but this time with something like pride. She rose, brushing the creases from her skirt. One by one, the children approached, pressing their little thank yous into her palms, offering crumpled drawings of stick figure families under rainbows. She accepted each one with careful attention, memorizing the scrawled names at the bottom. "Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Jackson. Thank you, Ava." When the last drawing slipped into her hand, she realized her fingers were sticky with the remnants of glitter glue and crayon wax. She licked a speck off her fingertip, a mischievous grin tugging at her lips. In the corporate world, she would have ordered an assistant to handle such mess and likely scrubbed the evidence from the furniture. Here she traced the ridges of a child's handprint in pink and green, marveling at the care each child had taken to share a piece of themselves. Marcus stepped forward then, as if on cue. He bent to scoop up Noah, who yawned and stretched in his father's arms. Noah's hair was mussed, his shirt stained with a smudge of crayon on the collar, and yet in his half-dream he looked perfect. Evelyn felt an unexpected pang, an ache she barely recognized as she watched Marcus cradle their son. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "He did great," she said quietly, voice soft with admiration. Her eyes met Marcus's, and in that brief exchange she glimpsed the depth of his gratitude, the weight of his silent struggles. He nodded, eyes moist, and bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement. No one stirred to leave. The room felt too suspended in gentle reverie. Finally, a small voice piped up. "Timmy," his eyes huge behind his glasses, "can you come back and read to us again?" He wriggled out of his chair and tugged at Evelyn's sleeve. Evelyn crouched to his level, tucking the loose end of her blazer behind her. "I'd like that," she said, eyes warm. She looked around the classroom, the handprints on the walls, the tiny backpacks lined like soldiers along the cubbies, the half-finished hearts taped to the bulletin board. "I'd like that very much." Noah, half asleep but grinning, looked up at her. "You're my favorite, Mommy," he mumbled, voice sleepy. Her chest tightened. She knelt beside him, brushing a thumb across his cheek. "And you're my favorite son," she whispered back. As she straightened, a hush fell over the classroom once more. The other children watched her, as if noticing for the first time the mix of apricot blush and empathy on her face. Evelyn sensed their quiet curiosity, their budding admiration. She realized how far she had traveled in a few hours, from the sleek lines of her Range Rover to the worn linoleum floors of a first-grade classroom, from a life measured in shares and dividends to moments measured in crumbs of cookie-scented warmth. She gathered her things, storybook daisies, now a little wilted cupcake box with a half-eaten treat inside, and followed Marcus to the door. The corridor outside was bright with fluorescent light, the distant echo of other classes beginning their day. Evelyn felt a gentle tug in her chest, as though something internal had shifted irrevocably. As she and Marcus stepped into the hallway, Noah's soft breathing against his father's shoulder became her new soundtrack. Evelyn inhaled deeply and realized with a clarity she hadn't known she sought how starved she'd been for authenticity. For laughter uncalculated, for small hands pressed trustingly in hers, for the unvarnished connection of story time. In the boardroom she had commanded attention. Here she had given her heart away freely and without guarantee. For the first time in years, Evelyn's heart felt whole. In that softened smile, in the warmth of a story shared, she found something more precious than any quarterly gain, the pure, unguarded joy of something real. They stepped out of room 1A into the bright hallway, the din of recess echoing behind them, children's shouts and sneakers scraping on linoleum. Marcus guided Noah by the hand toward the row of lockers, but paused halfway, leaning against a pale blue wall. His chest rose and fell in a slow tremor. Evelyn watched him, her heart tightening at the sight of his worn shoulders and the way his hoodie hung heavy, as if soaked through with more than rain. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, voice almost drowned out by the distant laughter of the other classes. She crossed the small gap between them and stood beside him, her high heels clicking on the floor in an unfamiliar staccato. Marcus exhaled, running a hand through his damp hair. He glanced at Evelyn, eyes shadowed. I've been doing this alone since Noah was 2, he said, almost to himself. He knelt, pulling Noah close against his side. His mom. She passed after a long illness. Cancer. It was quick in the end, but the rebuilding took years. I've handled diaper changes, PTA meetings, bedtime stories, homework, meltdowns, all of it by myself. His voice caught on the last words, brittle as dry twigs. Evelyn's breath stuck. She reached out tentatively, placing a hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry," she murmured. The corridor's bright fluorescent lights seemed to dim around them, leaving only the raw honesty between two people who had each braced against loss in their own ways. He shook his head, meeting her gaze with a wry half-smile. "No apologies," he said. "I made choices, chose to keep working gigs, renting this apartment, juggling every role because someone had to. and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But it's hard. It's lonely some nights at 3 in the morning when Noah needs a parent, and all I have is a half-built science fair volcano and a bottle of aspirin. He exhaled, voice rough. Have you ever tried gluing a papier-mâché cone at 3 a.m. with only half your brain awake and a 2-foot-tall model about to collapse? Evelyn blinked, and then without thinking, she laughed an open, genuine sound that startled her more than it did him. He chuckled too, and for a moment their shared laughter pushed back the weight of hospital rooms and lonely nights. The tension between them unraveled, replaced by an unexpected warmth. I've never done that, Evelyn admitted, her tone softening further. I don't know the first thing about science fairs. My idea of hands-on work is signing contracts and reviewing spreadsheets. Late nights in the office always end with me ordering takeout, not gluing anything that isn't a fiscal report. He grinned and his eyes lit up. That figures. You probably have an assistant for takeout orders too. She managed a small laugh, the sound gentler now. Guilty as charged. She paused, then looked down at Noah, who was busy pressing his palm to the locker door in a makeshift handshake. How does he hold up? Marcus lifted Noah's chin, brushing a damp curl from his forehead. He's amazing. Tougher than I am most days. He gets scared, but he keeps going. He loves science. Every project is a new adventure, even if they blow up more often than they succeed. He ruffled Noah's hair. And he loves stories, especially the ones you read to him. He's been buzzing about super dads and magical moms ever since. Evelyn smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She crouched to Noah's level, smoothing his rumpled school shirt. You did great today, she told him, voice soft. I'm really proud of you. Noah looked up, eyes bright. Thanks, Mommy, he said without hesitation, throwing his arms around Evelyn's neck. Her heart twisted at the sweetness of it, the ease with which he laid claim to her. Marcus cleared his throat, and they both turned to him. He offered Evelyn a gentle smile. Thank you, he said, for today, for caring. Evelyn stood brushing off imaginary specks of chalk from her skirt. I'm the one who should be thanking you, she replied earnestly, for trusting me with Noah and for letting me in. She paused, considering how to bridge the gap between their worlds. I've never believed I could make a difference in someone's life just by showing up. But today, she trailed off, searching for the right words. Today I felt useful, needed. It's more powerful than any boardroom accolade. Marcus nodded, his gaze drifting to the sea of young students now filing back into the classrooms. That's what he needs, Marcus said, voice low. Consistency. Someone who shows up, even when life's messy. He gave Evelyn a knowing look. You showed up. A soft smile spread across Evelyn's face. I think I'd like to keep showing up, she admitted. The words felt both terrifying and liberating as they hung in the corridor's air. Noah, sensing their solemn moment, looked between them. Then he said with the fierce confidence of a child who believes anything is possible, I want to be strong like Daddy and smart like you. He grinned, pride shining in his eyes. Evelyn's chest tightened so suddenly she thought she might not breathe. She met Marcus's eyes, seeing mirrored in his expression the same surge of hope and something deeper relief that the child they shared care for had found stability in their unexpected partnership. Marcus scooped Noah into his arms, and the boy wrapped his legs around his father's waist. He's always been strong, Marcus said, voice thick with emotion. He just needed someone to remind him. Evelyn stepped closer, hesitating only for a heartbeat before placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. And he has that thanks to both of us, she said softly. They stood together in the corridor, a tableau of a man and a woman bonded by the fierce love of a child. Around them, normal school life resumed, the bustle of teachers, the clip-clop of children's shoes, distant laughter and chatter. But in that moment they existed in their own world forged from honesty and vulnerability. Evelyn took a steadying breath, leaning her back against the cool hallway wall. The corporate armor she'd worn for years felt unnecessary here, melting away under the glow of shared understanding. She glanced at the scuffed linoleum floors, the bright posters on the walls, and realized that her empire of glass and steel had never offered anything as real as this, an imperfect but genuine connection. No glue guns at 3 a.m. Marcus teased gently, nodding toward her coat pocket, where the child-safe scissors and a handful of glitter still peeked out. Evelyn laughed again, a soft, rich sound that echoed off the lockers. No glue guns, she agreed. But I'll learn if I have to. Marcus's lips curved in a tender smile. We'll make a crafter out of you yet. Evelyn glanced down at Noah's sleeping face in his father's arms. A fierce protectiveness blossomed within her. No more distance, no more walls. She would show up unflinchingly. She would be messy and tired and vulnerable, and maybe that was the point. She straightened, smoothing the front of her skirt and tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Let's get him home, she said, nodding toward the exit doors. I'm ready to tackle dinner volcano glue and all. Marcus chuckled, shifting Noah in his arms. Sounds like a plan. Together they walked down the hallway side by side, the sounds of the school day rising around them once more. In their wake, the glow of newfound trust and the promise of a makeshift family lingered like the fading notes of a shared song, an anthem of hope stitched from the everyday courage of simply showing up. Evelyn woke early the next morning with an odd flutter in her chest, as if a routine she hadn't noticed was quietly unfolding. She checked her phone. No urgent messages from the office, no investor emails marked urgent. Instead, there was a text from Miss Lopez. Noah jumped right into the art project today. Thanks again for the book. Evelyn slipped into a soft cashmere sweater and jeans, a conscious choice to blend in rather than stand out. She gathered the picture book she'd bought the night before the adventures of Luna the space cat and placed it in a paper bag with a handwritten note for Noah from Ms. Hart. The Range Rover waited outside her townhouse as usual, tinted windows reflecting the gray dawn light. Evelyn hesitated, then texted her driver. Actually, just drop me at the subway station. I'll meet you later. She locked the door, leaving behind the world of leather portfolios and stainless steel coffee tumblers. A few blocks away, she slipped onto the M train, clutching her book. The city humming around her, a mosaic of early commute professionals, yawning teenagers, and a man kneeling to tie his toddler's shoelaces on a folding seat. Evelyn inhaled the aroma of newspaper ink and hot coffee, letting herself relax for the first time in days. She emerged in Brooklyn and walked the last few blocks to Marcus's walk-up building, its fire escape a black zigzag against weathered brick. At the bottom of the stoop, she paused, smoothing her silk scarf and reminding herself why she was here. She climbed the steps 2 at a time, knocked and stepped back. No answer. She pressed her ear to the door, hearing muffled giggles and the soft thunk of a book landing on a table. She smiled, slipped the picture book inside through the mail slot, and scuttled down the stairs before anyone could spot her. Later that morning, during Noah's recess, Evelyn found herself hovering just beyond the chain-link fence. The playground rang with shouts and the scrape of sneakers. Children zigzagged between swings and jungle gyms. She tucked her sunglasses into her pocket. Noah had noticed yesterday that she usually wore them, and he'd grinned knowingly. Without her usual shield, she felt exposed, but happier for it. She kept low, leaning against a lamppost and reading the dedication she'd written. May Luna's adventures inspire you to dream big. The cool spring breeze stirred her hair, and she watched Noah sprint toward her on the other side of the fence, arms pumping, face flushed with joy. He waved wildly, and she returned his grin, blowing him an exaggerated kiss. He replied with a thumbs up before hurrying back to his friends. By midday, Evelyn began to recognize the quiet rhythm of Marcus's block, the corner bodega, where an elderly man in a stained apron stocked the potato chips. The deli window, where a neon buy one get one sign flickered. The metal gate of the community garden down the road. She found herself edging into the bodega ostensibly to choose a bottle of water, but really to loiter in the cereal aisle, comparing instant mac and cheese brands of all things. She squinted at the price tags and ingredient lists as if they were annual reports, and the clerk gave her a sideways glance. "Can I help you find something, ma'am?" he asked. Evelyn looked up, startled. "Oh no, I'm just looking," she said, forcing a laugh. She picked up a box of the cheap neon orange kind. I'm doing a taste test with my son." The clerk raised an eyebrow but said nothing more and walked away. Evelyn set the box back on the shelf and grabbed a small bag of granola clusters instead. As she headed for the register, her phone buzzed a reminder of a lunch and learn she was supposed to host over video at noon. She stared at the screen, felt the old impulse to reply, and spin back into her high-stakes world. But the bodega's linoleum floor felt grounding beneath her flats. She swiped her bagel and almond milk across the scanner. Keep the change, she told the cashier, dropping a 20 on the counter and turning on her heel before the clerk could argue. That afternoon, when Evelyn's driver finally collected her at the usual time, she climbed into the back seat holding a half-empty paper bag. He eyed her curiously in the rear-view mirror. "Back so soon, Ms. Hart," he ventured. She smiled, tucking the bag beside her. "Needed some fresh air," she said. The car rumbled back toward Manhattan, but Evelyn stared out at the passing buildings, feeling that her world was expanding in ways she hadn't anticipated. Over the next few days, these small trespasses became her secret routine. She'd drop off a new picture book, The Little Inventor's Workshop, The Girl Who Loved Dinosaurs, each time with a different note. She never rang the bell. The mail slot was her portal. At recess, she'd wave from the fence, slowly weaving herself into the backdrop of Noah's school life. One afternoon, she lingered too long at the bodega's instant mac and cheese aisle. The clerk looked at her thoughtfully and said, "You know, you can just grab what you like." Evelyn blinked. I thought I'd try them all." "For him," she said, mentally adjusting on the fly. "I want to see which one tastes most like home." The clerk paused, then nodded with an unexpected kindness. "I've got some imported cheddar mac. Tough to find, but I can order more if you need." "Thank you," Evelyn said, genuine gratitude warming her voice. "I'll take one box." She felt her cheeks flush as if admitting a secret desire. Sometimes Marcus caught her at the window of his building coat off and hair mussed from the day's heat. He'd peer out, eyebrows raised. Billionaire grocery stocking now, he teased one afternoon, catching her selecting a different flavor. His tone was light, but his eyes held an affectionate challenge. Evelyn laughed, rolling the box in her hands. "In my defense, you never know which orange cheese dust will win a 6-year-old's heart." Marcus shook his head, a grin tugging at his lips. "You're ridiculous." Then, seeing her earnest expression, he added quietly, "And I'm grateful." Each encounter chipped away at the polished veneer she wore. The grandeur of the high-rise boardroom felt hollow compared to the warmth of these small exchanges. She discovered that she looked forward to the feel of peach-scented almond milk, the hum of children playing the worn linoleum under her shoes. Mundane details that somehow grounded her in a life that mattered. One evening, after a rare cancellation of her typical string of meetings, Evelyn found herself on the stoop of Marcus's building again. She carried a bag of granola and a cold water bottle, intending to say hello, maybe peek in at Noah, practicing his reading. The door swung open before she could knock, and there stood Marcus, looking surprised. "You're full of surprises," he said. He stepped aside and let her in. The hallway smelled faintly of laundry soap and homemade pizza, the evidence of another father-son evening, improvised and real. Evelyn hesitated, then handed him the granola. "For after school," she said, voice slightly breathless. Marcus studied her for a heartbeat, then nodded, tucking the bag under his arm. "Thanks. Come on in." Inside Noah's room was a colorful jumble of toy rockets, dinosaur models, and half-completed Lego creations. He looked up from his desk where he was tracing constellations in a notebook. When he saw Evelyn, his face lit up. "You came back!" he exclaimed, rushing over. He hugged her fiercely, and she laughed, surprised by how natural it felt. "I brought snacks," she said, ruffling his hair. "Granola." He bounced on his toes. "Great Daddy says it's my brain food." He darted back to his desk to pack a handful into a little metal tin. Evelyn settled into the small wooden chair, the one scarred by crayon marks and sticker residue. Marcus perched on the bed edge, watching them. The apartment was modest, a threadbare rug, mismatched cushions, a single radiator humming in the corner, but it felt more like home than any of her penthouse rooms ever had. As Noah chatted about his latest science project, an erupting volcano built with baking soda and vinegar, Evelyn found herself offering suggestions. "What if you use baking powder? It might fizz more." It was the first time she'd volunteered advice outside of strategy sessions and profit margins. Noah's eyes widened. He nodded vigorously and scribbled down her idea. Marcus caught Evelyn's eye and raised an eyebrow. "You're really getting into this." He observed a teasing lilt in his voice. Evelyn shrugged, but her smile was genuine. "I guess I am." She paused, looking between Marcus and Noah. This is good." The simplicity of their life of scrambled eggs at dinner, spilled milk at breakfast, and bedtime stories under a scratchy blanket felt like an oasis. Marcus nodded, softening. You're welcome here, you know. She swallowed the weight of gratitude warming her chest. Thank you. She reached out and squeezed his hand. For letting me cross into your world. He squeezed back, and in that quiet moment, the boundaries between their lives dissolved. No more boardroom or bodega, just a father, a son, and an unexpected partner who chose to show up day after day, piece by everyday piece. Evelyn slipped off her heels at the door, balancing a bottle of red wine in one hand and the faint scent of espresso still clinging to her coat. Marcus greeted her with a tired but genuine smile, holding the flimsy door open against his stocked-to-the-brim hallway. Come on in, he said, voice warm. Warning Operation Spaghetti is underway. She stepped into the tiny apartment kitchen where the air smelled of garlic and something slightly singed. A single overhead bulb cast a golden glow on every scuff and scratch, the chipped formica countertop, the wobbly fold-up table, and the mismatched chairs, one plastic, one metal, a repurposed milk crate with a cushion. A scratched pot simmered on the stove beside a baking sheet of garlic bread that looked at best well done. This looks amazing, Evelyn said, setting down the wine. She slipped her purse onto the one chair that didn't squeak and hovered for a moment, marveling at the contrast with her penthouse's stainless steel surfaces. Marcus poured her a plastic cup measure of wine, then ladled steaming spaghetti onto 2 paper plates. The noodles were soft to the point of collapsed sauce, clinging in globs. She bit her lip to keep from wincing. Sorry, Marcus apologized, handing over a fork balanced on a napkin. I'm no chef, I'm more of a jack of all trades. Plumbing, deliveries, amateur woodwork, he chuckled, lifting his cup in a mock toast. To versatility. Evelyn lifted hers in return. To versatility, she echoed the plastic rim cool against her fingers. She took a bite of spaghetti. The noodles were chewy in places, mushy in others, and the sauce tasted of crushed tomatoes, garlic, and a hint of something smoky, probably from the garlic bread. She managed a grin. Delicious. He laughed, relieved. You're a good liar. She shrugged and dug in sauce dribbling onto her blouse. I faced worse disasters. Boardroom presentations, annual reports. This is quaint by comparison. Sauce splattered to the table and Evelyn reached to catch an escaping meatball. It rolled off her fork and plopped onto the floor. She dropped her fork and burst out laughing. Marcus joined in the clink of his cup against the table, punctuating his amusement. I told you I can't cook, he said, scooping the rogue meatball back onto her plate with his fork. She waved off his apology. This is perfect, she insisted, mop-up napkin in hand. I'm dining at the finest fold-up establishment in Brooklyn. He grinned, shaking his head. I should charge admission. Between bites, Marcus launched into a story about last week's handyman gig. He'd been called to fix a leaky radiator at a client's apartment at 3 a.m. The radiator had burst halfway through his work, showering him with scalding steam and sending him scrambling for a wrench in his underwear. I had to finish the job barefoot, he recalled, wincing at the memory. One wrong move and I'd have been in the ER. Evelyn winced. And you fixed it. He nodded, taking a thoughtful sip of his wine. Had to. No one else would. The landlord was threatening eviction if he couldn't get heat back before dawn. She shook her head, admiring his grit. I bless my assistant every time my email dings after midnight. He laughed. Yeah, no radiator emergencies in your world. She grinned, eyeing her sauce-stained blouse. Nope, just clients who threatened to sue. Their laughter eased the cramped kitchen's tension. Evelyn tipped the plate to share a garlic bread sliver. She bit into it and nearly choked on the charred edge. He slapped his hand over her other fork. Whoa, burnt offering. She coughed, fanning her mouth. Tastes crispy. She laughed again, sauce smeared and fine with it. You know, I spent years believing that if everything wasn't perfect, I wasn't good enough. Boardrooms demand it. She paused, clearing her throat. But this right here, messy dinner and all, it's real. Marcus set down his cup and studied her face in the dim light. I spent years believing my ex and everyone else would leave if I wasn't enough. If I couldn't fix the house, the bills myself. He paused, voice low. Then her illness. It showed me how little control I have, but I kept going because Noah needed me. Evelyn felt a catch in her throat. She reached across the fold-up table and placed a hand over his. You are enough, she said gently. He needs you. He squeezed her hand, eyes moist. And you? Showing up like this more than enough. Silence settled between them, an unspoken gratitude vibrating in the small space. The city's distant hum seeped through the window, punctuated by a passing siren. They sat close shoulders, nearly touching the flimsy table, no barrier between them. Noah's voice echoed through the apartment. Daddy. Mommy. Look. He came bounding into the kitchen, hands covered in cookie dough. I helped make dessert. Evelyn rose, laughing. I love cookie dough. She watched Marcus scoop up their son, whisking him into a hug. And I love this chaos. Marcus set Noah down on a kitchen stool and handed him a spoon. Be our official taste tester, he said. Noah dove in, grinning through sprinkles of flour. Evelyn leaned on the countertop, watching them. The little family, imperfect and full of laughter, felt like a revelation. She took a deep breath, savoring the warmth that buzzed beneath her skin, a warmth no fancy boardroom could provide. When the dishes were cleared, paper plates balled into the recycling bin cups stacked in the sink, they stood side by side, leaning against the counter. Marcus took a rag and wiped the splattered sauce from the stove. Evelyn stood quietly watching him fold the rag, the domestic routine oddly comforting. You don't have to do this alone, Evelyn said softly. He shook his head, eyes on the rag. I don't have to. You're here. Her pulse fluttered. She met his gaze. I want to be. He smiled, folding his shoulders down as if he'd been holding his breath. I'd like that. They turned off the lights, and the apartment settled into evening hush. Hand in hand, they crossed the room, Marcus leading Noah, by the hand, Evelyn close behind. The tiny space felt expansive now, filled with the echoes of spilled sauce and burnt bread, of shared fears and newfound comfort. As Evelyn stepped out into the night air, cool and fragrant with the promise of rain, she felt a quiet joy settle in her chest. Presence, she realized, was the greatest gift of all. Not power or perfection, but the simple act of showing up, plate in hand, hearts open wide. Evelyn sat in her corner office, the early morning skyline blurred by gathering storm clouds. Her assistant's email pinged insistently on her laptop. Urgent board concerns or recent media attention. See attached. She clicked open the attachment and her breath caught. A formal shareholder notice warned that her unsanctioned involvement with Marcus and Noah had become a material reputational risk, one that could trigger a board inquiry and even a vote of no confidence. The language was clinical, but unmistakably threatening her off-script life, was endangering the firm's image and, by extension, its bottom line. She closed the file, hands trembling just enough that she had to grip the edge of her desk to keep from spilling her coffee. For years she had wielded power like a shield, insulated, invulnerable, untouchable. And now a 6-year-old's trust and a single father's quiet strength had become liability bullet points in a shareholder deck. The world she commanded in polished conference rooms demanded perfection, predictability, control, none of which matched the messy truth of belonging. Evelyn stood smoothing her blazer and inhaling deeply. She would not let them define her life by their quarterly perspectives. She called Marcus as she stepped into the elevator. His voice crackled through the speaker, tired but warm. They've been circling, haven't they? She exhaled. They see us as a headline, not a family. She paused. Daniel Marks has filed a guardianship petition. The name landed between them like a hammer blow. Daniel, Noah's uncle, long estranged, claimed that Marcus's financial instability and her undue influence threatened the boy's welfare. He demanded sole legal guardianship. Silence. Then Marcus's shaky breath. So we're going to court, he asked. We're protecting what we've built, she said firmly. I'll be there with you. They met that afternoon in Marcus's living room, the fold-up table still tucked against the wall like a relic of happier chaos. Noah was with a neighbor's babysitter, and Evelyn poured 2 glasses of wine from the bottle he'd left on the counter. The label was almost gone, a forgivable casualty of dinner, and the cork lay on a coaster beside her. She watched Marcus cradle the glass knuckles white. We'll hire a custody attorney, she said, voice steady. Someone who understands family law and how to argue on our behalf. She slid her phone across the table, opening a contact list. I know someone, Claire Novak. She's won tougher fights. He nodded, relief flickering. Good. I don't know how to argue. Evelyn reached across, placing her hand on his. You don't have to. Your life with Noah speaks for itself. I'll handle the rest. She squeezed his hand, her resolve solidifying. They think they can scare us off, but they don't know what love can do. Later that week, they sat in the cramped chamber of family court. The walls were institutional beige, the air tinged with the hum of fluorescent lights. Daniel Marks arrived flanked by his attorney, a sharp-suited woman whose expression never softened. Marcus stood in his threadbare suit, an old hand-me-down that had never truly fit him. Evelyn stood beside him in a charcoal dress, her posture unyielding. The judge, silver-haired and weary, peered over his glasses. This petition alleges Mr. Hill is unfit to serve as Noah Hill's guardian due to financial instability and lack of a stable home. It also suggests Ms. Hart's involvement may constitute undue influence. Mr. Marks, you may proceed. Daniel's lawyer rose, voice smooth as oil. Your Honor. Mr. Hill's devotion is unquestionable, but he is a gig worker at best, no benefits, no security, no degree. He rents a 2-bedroom walk-up with leaky radiators. His income fluctuates unpredictably. My client, as Noah's blood uncle, seeks to ensure a future untethered from such instability. Ms. Hart's role, while benevolent, raises serious questions about corporate interference in private family matters. Across the room, Evelyn felt Marcus stiffen. She met his eye and offered a small nod. This was where her voice would matter most. When the lawyer sat, Evelyn stood. The courtroom hushed. Your Honor, she began, voice echoing against the high ceiling. I understand the concerns about stability, but stability is not measured in square footage or bank statements. It's measured in presence and devotion. Marcus Hill has shown up for his son every single day since his wife passed. He has fixed leaky pipes at 2 a.m, juggled 3 jobs to pay rent, and never once allowed Noah to feel alone. She paused, scanning the gallery. Daniel's furrowed brow, Noah clutching his babysitter's hand from the back bench. Marcus's hopeful gaze. I am a CEO, yes, but I did not sign up for this role to play dress-up. Every moment I spend with Noah is genuine. I bake the cookies myself. I've learned to navigate homework, to sniff out burnt garlic bread, to coax laughter out of a boy who has known too much loss. If love and commitment are liabilities, then we must redefine value. If devotion is a risk, then so be it. Daniel's attorney bristled but could not look away. Evelyn continued, softer now, her voice shaking just a fraction. My company survives on human trust, clients, investors, employees. I am not risking their confidence for a publicity stunt. I am investing my humanity in a child who needed someone to believe in him. Love is not transactional. It does not come with clauses. It comes with sacrifice. The silence that followed was thick, as if the entire courtroom held its collective breath. The judge tapped his gavel. Ms. Hart, thank you for your testimony. He turned to Daniel. Mr. Marks, do you wish to respond? When Daniel rose, his polished argument sounded hollow in the wake of Evelyn's truth. He spoke of family legacy and protecting the child's best interests, but the words felt contrived. Marcus's attorney objected to each insinuation of Marcus's unfitness, and even Daniel's resolve seemed to falter under the weight of a mother's by proxy vow. After hours of legal sparring, the court recessed. Evelyn followed Marcus into the hallway. He pressed her arm. Thank you, he whispered, for fighting for him. She brushed a damp strand of hair from her forehead. He's worth it. Noah, escorted in by his babysitter, ran to them and seized Marcus's hand. When he saw Evelyn, his face brightened. Will I still have a daddy? He asked, voice small. Evelyn knelt, pulling him close. You have a daddy, she said firmly, and you have me. We're a team. His nod was solemn. 6-year-old gravity mixed with a budding confidence. He looked up at her. I knew you wouldn't let me go. Her eyes stung. I'll never let you go. They stood together, a trio bound by more than legal definitions, a family forged in daily bread and shared fears, in spilled sauce and bedtime stories. Outside, the storm clouds broke a shaft of sunlight cutting through the courthouse windows. It illuminated their clasped hands and the hopeful faces of 3 people who had chosen each other against every risk. In that moment, Evelyn understood that power couldn't protect them, and wealth couldn't bind them. Only courage. The courage to stand up and speak truth to the world could build the family they fought for. And as they moved back into the courtroom for the judge's ruling, each step echoed with the promise that love's true power was finally being tested. The courtroom settled into a brittle silence as Daniel Marks's lawyer rose once more, sleek in her charcoal suit, clipboard in hand. The judge's gavel tapped lightly against the dais, and every eye in the room fixed on the polished veneer of Mr. Marks's counsel as she began her closing argument. "Your Honor," she said, voice low and measured, "we do not dispute Mr. Hill's love for his son, but love, while noble, cannot replace the stability born of financial security and consistent access to educational resources. Mr. Hill works gig-to-gig subsisting in a rent-stabilized walk-up with sporadic heat. He cannot guarantee Noah's future, not the college fund, not the nightly lunches, perhaps not even tomorrow's rent." Across the aisle, Evelyn's stomach clenched. She glanced at Marcus, whose jaw clenched in response. He wore his only suit, the one his late father had left him, and it fit loosely, every thread a reminder of how far they'd come on shoestring budgets and elbow grease. When the lawyer laid out photographs of the apartment peeling wallpaper, a radiator that had lost its battle with the cold, she implied that love alone could not substitute for a structured family pedigree. The judge leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Miss Hart, you may address the court." Evelyn's breath caught. She stood smoothing the fabric of her dress as if preparing to step onto a boardroom stage. But this was no merger pitch. This was a child's life. She felt the weight of every shareholder notice still echoing in her inbox, the whispers among the board that her off-script compassion was a liability. She inhaled, tapping into the fierce calm that had carried her through countless deals, then spoke with a clarity so focused it cut through the stale courtroom air. "Your Honor," she began, voice resonant, "there's a misconception that stability is measured in square footage and stock portfolios. But I've watched Mr. Hill cradle his son through midnight fevers in that same apartment. I've seen him navigate hospital corridors at dawn white-knuckled and unwavering because he refused to leave his son's side. I'm not here to present a balance sheet. I'm here to present the truth of devotion in action." Her gaze swept the room, pausing on the judge's thoughtful expression, then resting on Marcus's face. He stood a little taller, shoulders squared. Evelyn continued, "Marcus Hill isn't wealthy in your terms, but he has wealth measured in presence. He is the man who traded a steady paycheck to ensure he could be there for every scraped knee, every science project, every tear. He taught our son that being present is the greatest gift a parent can give, that Your Honor is the definition of strength." A murmur rippled through the spectator benches. Daniel's lawyer tightened her lips, but could not offer a retort. Evelyn's words carried a force that facts on a page could not match. She stepped back, holding on to the momentary hush she'd created, and let the silence speak as loudly as any argument. Then unexpectedly, the judge called forward the child of interest. Noah Hill, escorted by the court-appointed guardian, rose from the back of the room. His small frame looked even more delicate in his best shirt, one with tiny rockets printed on the sleeves. He took a step toward the bench, chin trembling only slightly, and every breath the room took waited on his next words. "My name is Noah," he began, voice surprisingly steady, issuing across the room like a quiet gale. "And I already have a dad." His eyes found Marcus's, bright with conviction, then flicked to Evelyn. "And I pick him." He paused, took a deep breath. "And I pick her too." That declaration hung in the air, an unassailable truth. Marcus's attorney closed her mouth in awe. Daniel Marks's lawyer pressed her fists into her sides, stifling an objection. The judge tapped his gavel gently, allowing the gravity of a 6-year-old's choices to sink in before he spoke. Based on the evidence and the clearly expressed preference of the child, the petition for guardianship is denied, he said, voice firm. Mr. Hill retains sole guardianship of Noah Hill. He looked at Evelyn. "Ms. Hart, your testimony on parental devotion rather than financial metrics was persuasive. This court acknowledges the bond you formed and the stability you provide alongside Mr. Hill in ways that documents cannot capture." Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her chest richer than any victory she'd ever tasted in her corporate life. The courtroom's tension melted into relief, punctuated by a ripple of applause, soft at first, then growing as parents and onlookers recognized the triumph of love over ledger sheets. When the judge adjourned the proceedings, Evelyn moved toward Marcus and Noah, toes softly patting on the linoleum. She knelt to wrap her arms around her son, who buried his face in her shoulder. His small body trembled with joy, and Evelyn pressed her cheek to his damp hair, inhaling the scent of shampoo and hope. Marcus stood beside them, eyes glossy, and reached out to clasp Evelyn's hand. "We did it," he whispered, voice husky. She looked up at him, her smile luminous. "We did." Outside the courtroom, the spring air felt electric. Journalists craned their necks as the newly affirmed family emerged hand in hand, a picture of quiet resilience. Flashbulbs popped, but Evelyn didn't flinch. For once, the glare of the world felt more like spotlights than interrogation. By the time they reached the sidewalk, traffic had slowed to a crawl. Noah tugged at Marcus's sleeve, pointing at a cluster of daisy-bedecked bloom stands. "Can we get flowers?" he asked, sudden as a spring breeze. Marcus ruffled his hair. "Of course, buddy." Evelyn slipped an arm around Marcus's waist. "Freedom tastes sweeter than any merger and acquisition victory," she said, voice soft with triumph. He nodded, brushing a kiss to her temple. Together they strolled down the block free at last, to forge a life measured not in assets or share price, but in the simple currency of everyday love. They tumbled through the door of Marcus's apartment, laughter spilling out ahead of them like confetti. Noah, still clutching his paper crown, bounded across the threadbare rug and flopped onto the worn couch legs, splayed in triumphant abandon. Evelyn kicked off her flats, sliding her feet beneath her, and Marcus dropped 2 crumpled pizza boxes onto the fold-up table. The savory scent of pepperoni and cheese filled the tiny room, mingling with the faint hum of the radiator in the corner. "Pizza celebration," Noah declared, scooping up a slice with sauce-slick fingers. He pressed the paper crown deeper onto his head. "For winning the big fight," Evelyn smiled, smoothing sauce from his cheek with the tip of her thumb. "A victory feast, then." She poured soda into plastic cups, handing one to Marcus and one to herself. The cheap fizz bubbled fiercely, chasing away every trace of courtroom tension. As they ate, Marcus leaned back against the radiator, eyes bright. "We did this?" he said, voice hushed, as though saying it any louder might break the fragile magic of the moment. Evelyn nodded, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "We did." She folded her napkin and cleared her throat. "And I have some news." She drew a breath, feeling the weight of both excitement and trepidation. "I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations at Hart Capital." Marcus choked on his soda. "What? You can't be serious." She laughed softly, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "I am. I've decided to launch the Second Chance Foundation. It'll focus on families exactly like ours, those overlooked, under-resourced, but brimming with love and potential." Noah's mouth fell open in mid-chew. "Like us. Exactly like us." Evelyn said, a tender smile lighting her eyes. "Helping single parents find stability funding, after-school programs, providing legal support when things get tough." She looked at Marcus, watching the relief and hope flood his face. "I want to give back what we received, someone believing in us." Marcus stood, sweeping aside the empty pizza boxes. He retrieved a stack of paper crowns and perched one jauntily on his own head. "Then let's toast to new beginnings." They raised their cups' plastic rims pressed to shining eyes and drank deeply. The laughter returned stronger than before, wrapping them in the promise that home was not where you came from, but where you chose to stay. Weeks later, the modest offices of the Second Chance Foundation buzzed with activity. Evelyn strode through hallways painted in soft blue, meeting smiling caseworkers and volunteers who greeted her like an old friend. Family portraits decorated the walls, children in crayon portraits, single parents in headshot frames. Each image a reminder of the mission she'd set out to fulfill. Marcus joined her, guiding a small tour group through a resource library where shelves overflowed with children's books and legal pamphlets. Noah darted ahead, clutching a clipboard as if he were a junior director, beaming every time someone acknowledged his help. They'd rented a corner storefront in a neighborhood halfway between Evelyn's penthouse and Marcus's brownstone. It was just big enough for desks, a small play area, and a kitchenette that served free coffee to parents in crisis. But the warmth inside those walls was enough to eclipse any skyscraper's glare. Evelyn sometimes paused in the hallway, closing her eyes to savor the sound of children's laughter and quiet conversations about housing vouchers or scholarship applications. Each time she felt the steady conviction that she'd found purpose beyond profit margins. One afternoon, Marcus returned from a meeting with a group of single fathers, his face animated. He found Evelyn in the play area gluing construction paper stars onto a poster that read, "Welcome Families." "They want to host a weekend woodworking class for kids," he announced, waving a flyer. "I told them you'd be thrilled." She set her glue aside and hugged him, absolutely thrilled. They stood together watching Noah help a younger boy thread beads on a string. The boy's mother glanced over, gratitude shining in her eyes. In that moment, Evelyn felt something settle deep in her chest, the knowledge that love and commitment had rippled outward, creating space for others to belong. Months passed. The sun warmed the city earlier each day, coaxing blooms from windowsills and sparkles from the East River. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in rose and amber, Marcus led Evelyn down a narrow brick alleyway behind his apartment. String lights drooped between lampposts, casting a soft glow over rows of potted white roses and folding chairs draped in linen. A simple wooden arch stood at the far end, its beams entwined with vine tendrils and daisies, Noah's favorite flower. Evelyn paused, heart fluttering. She smoothed the front of her dress, a simple ivory gown she'd chosen for its unfussy elegance, and took in the scene: close friends from the foundation, neighbors from Marcus's block, and a handful of colleagues who'd driven in from the city. None wore diamonds. Instead, everyone wore paper crowns beneath the lights. Noah stood at a small wooden podium, his earnest expression magnified by the lantern glow. Marcus slipped an arm around Evelyn's waist, leaning his forehead against hers. "Are you ready?" he murmured, voice low. She exhaled, hand finding his. "I am." Noah cleared his throat, raising his small clipboard. "Welcome, everyone," he began, voice crisp with childlike resolve. "We're here to celebrate something important, 3 people choosing each other. First, my dad and Miss Hart promised to stay. Then, they fought for me in court. And now they're going to promise again, but this time for always." He swallowed, glanced at his father, then smiled. "So let's make it official. Does anyone object?" The laughter that followed was light and joyous, and when no objections rose, Noah stepped aside, allowing Marcus and Evelyn to stand beneath the arch, hands clasped. Marcus looked at Evelyn, eyes shimmering. "Evelyn Hart," he began, voice steady with emotion. "From the day you walked into that cafe, you changed our lives. You showed me that love can be a choice, and that choosing each other is the greatest act of courage." He reached into his jacket and produced a simple silver band. "I vow to show up for every scraped knee, every burnt garlic bread, and every midnight worry. I choose you always." Evelyn's eyes glistened. She pressed her thumb to the ring, then slid it onto his finger. "Marcus Hill," she said, voice warm and unwavering. "You taught me that presence outweighs perfection. That belonging comes from shared moments, messy or magnificent. Today, in front of our family, I vow to choose you and Noah every day to build our imperfect home on trust and kindness. Forever, not just for a day." As they slipped the rings onto each other's fingers, Noah marched forward with a flourish, producing a tiny velvet box containing his own officiant's crown, a paper cutout he'd decorated with glitter. He placed it on Evelyn's head with ceremonial care, then bowed to the assembled guests as if he alone had executed the grandest act of the evening. Under the string lights, Marcus gathered Evelyn into his arms and kissed her with the gentle certainty of a promise fulfilled. The gathered smiles and applause felt like the warmest spotlight, but Evelyn only had eyes for the 2 people she loved most, her son, who beamed up at them, and her husband, whose hand in hers was stronger than any merger agreement she'd ever signed. Afterward, they danced barefoot on the flagstone, laughter mingling with soft music from a nearby speaker. Paper crowns bobbed through the crowd as children and grown-ups twirled together, collars loosened and sleeves rolled up. Pizza arrived from Marcus's favorite corner pizzeria, followed by a modest cake from the bodega down the street. Every bite, every smile, every imperfect moment felt like a treasure more precious than any boardroom victory. As night deepened, the lanterns glowed brighter, and Evelyn realized that the life she'd forged, woven from courtroom battles, glitter glue mornings, and takeout dinners, was the real empire she'd been building all along. It wasn't made of steel or glass, but of moments chosen, risks taken, and love renewed. And there, beneath the gentle hum of the city and the soft rustle of leaves, they found their forever not anchored by contracts or conditions, but by the simple, unbreakable vow to stay.